Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we have a really cool opportunity to take a look at a 1918 OVP submachine gun. This is an Italian submachine gun, and it's basically one half of a Villar Perosa light machine gun. That's a gun that kind of defies categorization. The Italians developed them in 1915, early in World War I, and it was a twin-barrel, twin-magazine, pistol-caliber machine gun. I have a separate video on that, so if you aren't familiar with the regular Villar Perosa, definitely take a look at that video for some background. What the Italians decided was that this gun wasn't really all that practical or useful for really anything by the end of the war, and what they needed was a much more standard, well, what would become standard configuration submachine gun. So there were two that they came up with. One was the Beretta model of 1918, and one was the OVP, or Office of Villar Perosa, Officine Villar Perosa. Two different companies, both basically simultaneously developing the same sort of thing. So this, allegedly, they actually cut apart existing Villar Perosa machine guns to turn into these. And if they actually did that, they didn't take very much from the original guns. Pretty much the bolt mechanism and the magazine, and maybe the barrels, and that's about it. The receiver is entirely new. It's a tubular receiver, sort of, but very intricately machined, and instead of having a bolt handle, it has this almost pump shotgun-like sleeve that you use to charge the gun. So, by the way, these are extremely rare guns out there. There are very few of them around, and it's quite the privilege to get to take a look at one up close. So let's take it apart. So overall, these are very svelte little guns. They're pretty light, and it's a really interesting, very early submachine gun. So a couple of the unique bits. The magazine, this is the standard Villar Perosa magazine, holds 25 rounds. It has this unusual front-mounted magazine release. So if you pull that back, you can then pop the magazine out like so. It is open on the back, so you can see how many rounds you have left. And then to insert the magazine, you lock the rear lug in first. There we go. And then snap it down like that. It's actually a little bit awkward to load, especially if you have ammo in the gun and the bolt's closed. On the fire control group, we only have a couple of things going on. We have a lever here for the safety, safe and fire, and then, typical of what we would continue to see in Italian submachine guns, a pair of triggers. Front trigger is for semi-auto fire, and the rear trigger is for full auto. The only marking on it is here on the charging sleeve, and you can see there, Officine Di Villar Perosa, and serial number is 418 on this gun. And then nothing at all on this side of the action. We have some weight relieving flutes here, and that's about it, and a disassembly button, which we'll get to in just a moment. One unusual feature of this is that it actually has these machined rails on the bottom of the action. Not sure what exactly those are for, but the only logical explanation would appear to be a brass catching bag. That is the ejection port, so the magazine's on the top and they eject out the bottom. That is probably done because that's how the original Villar Perosa was built, and so in order to reclaim things like the magazine catch and this sleeve, they maintained that top fed bottom eject system. And then the sights are a little bit unusual. Because of the top mounted magazine, the sights are offset just slightly to the left, and there are two rear notches there. You can see a V-notch at the top and a V-notch at the bottom. They're not marked, and they are relatively far apart, so maybe 50 and 150 meters, maybe 100 and 200, something like that. And they, of course, line up with this slightly offset to the left barleycorn front sight. Now, for disassembly, we push in the button, which allows the stock to be removed. So you can do this just for transportation. However, the stock is actually a tool, a screwdriver, used to disassemble the rest of the gun. There's a slot here, and then up inside the action, right up in there, the recoil spring is screwed into this threaded section inside the receiver. So in order to get the bolt out, you have to unscrew this plug, and that allows the recoil spring to come out. It's got that square bar on it. So what we're going to do here is actually line the stock up and use the stock as a screwdriver to take this out. When you get done, of course, it will try to pop out under spring pressure. There it goes. So there's our recoil spring and guide, and that whole plug is threaded. In order to release the handle, once it's locked forward, we have to push down on this little button. So we'll do that. Bring the slide back. There's our striker. And the bolt, there we go. And the bolt has to slide out over the sear. So this bolt, which I apologize is rather filthy from firing, we'll get to that in just a moment. This is basically identical to an original Villar Perosa bolt. It is quite small and light. We have the striker that is nested entirely inside it. And the Villar Perosa has sort of a not quite delaying system. When the bolt is actually rotating, this trapezoidal lug and this lug have to line up in the same groove in the receiver. When it fires, this rotates down. So that offers both a way to ensure that it doesn't fire until it's fully locked, and honestly that's probably its primary purpose, and it also adds just a little bit of delay to the opening of the gun because this has to rotate back up before the whole thing can cycle open. You can see right here this track with the angled surface that this lug rides in when the thing cycles. There's one more bit we can take off, and that's the trigger guard housing, which is held on just by a little spring-loaded detent back here, or the detent's there, I'm sorry. And the safety lever comes out, and then we could remove the fire control bits if we took out some pins, but I don't want to mess around with trying to get those back in. So it's a very simple gun. Beyond this, it fires from an open bolt, and there's simply a sear. So the front trigger has a disconnector built in, and the rear trigger doesn't. So putting this back together, the whole idea of using the stock as a screwdriver seems like kind of a goofy idea, and it kind of is. However, if you're going to have the threading for that recoil plug milled into the receiver, trying to line up and start the threading on that plug is actually kind of really obnoxiously difficult. However, using the stock, because the stock plug fits perfectly into the receiver tube, that actually lines it up really well. So it's a good solution to a questionable design in the first place, perhaps. I would also point out this charging handle is a little bit awkward to use because it's sitting right in front of the fire control group. So it's cut out here to allow it to slide around this, but your hand isn't really, and you have to push this in order to unlock it. So if you're holding it like this, you kind of have to do that, but as soon as you start it moving, you have to move your hand off of here, open like this, or it almost seems like the easiest way to operate this is overhand. Lock the bolt open like that, and then close it. It's a little bit awkward, but I suppose that's something to be expected on literally one of the very first submachine guns ever. They're not going to get the design exactly perfect. Now, I think it's high time we load this up and see how it shoots. All right, so we have a really cool opportunity to actually put some rounds through this OVP 1918. This is in 9 Parabellum. The owner told me he wasn't sure if it was Glisenti or Parabellum, so he started hand loading for it and just upping the power level until he got the gun actually cycling. And he said once it was cycling, it was basically 9mm Parabellum loads. So that kind of answers that question. And that mag's a lot harder to load when it's actually got ammo in it. Now, we're going to push the button, charge the thing back, and then we're live and ready to fire. And I'm presuming the front trigger is semi-auto and the rear trigger is full. All right, that's the semi-auto, but that's not what you guys are interested in. Wow, that's fast. It shoots really fast. It kind of vibrates around on you, but it doesn't really climb all that much. Malfunction. Well, I had one good burst. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I certainly enjoyed this opportunity to not just take a look at and not just disassemble, but actually fire a 1918 OVP. So a big thank you to the collector who let me do this. And of course, you guys want to see a full mag dump. So we'll go ahead and do that on the way out.